incident, but the police currently are not regarding it as a terrorist incident. Both men who are in custody were born in the United Kingdom. Let's go back to Jack Carson. Jack.
Yeah, let's take you through the details that we got in the press conference. Of course, we were speaking 20 or so minutes ago, Andrew, talking about the vacuum that was being created and really the police needing to update us both on the suspects that they'd taken into custody and on those that had been injured in this horrible attack. So let's just take you through some of the things that Superintendent John Lovelace said in that press conference. He said that within 8 minutes of the 999 call, which we know was made at 7:42 p.m. to police yesterday, they said that within the 8 minutes of that 999 call, 2 men were in police custody, confirming, as you just said, they were a 32-year-old male, a black British national, and a 35-year-old male, a British national of Caribbean descent. He added they were both born in the UK and both have been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. And some positive news on some of the people that were taken to hospital yesterday. We've been speaking all morning, haven't we, about the huge response from the emergency services, particularly from the East of England ambulance service, and bringing in air ambulances from other regions across the country in order to get those people that were obviously in a critical condition to hospital so soon. He said in that press conference, Superintendent John Lovelace, that of the 9 people thought to have life-threatening injuries, 4 have been discharged and 2 remain in a life-threatening condition. We know that there is a 10th who had been admitted to hospital with a non-life-threatening injury, and also he confirmed that at a later point yesterday evening there was a further person admitted to hospital. Superintendent John Lovelace added, as you were saying, there is nothing, he says, to suggest at this time that this is a terrorist incident, but they say they continue to work at pace to establish the full circumstances and motivations that have led to this incident. We have seen that work at pace with forensic investigations very active here on scene, taking photos, gathering evidence so that the police can build that full picture.
All right, Jack, that's Jack Carson. Well, thank you so much all for watching me, Andrew Pearce, today in for Camilla Tominey. A bleak day, but mercifully the 9 seriously people with life-threatening injuries now down to 2. Now, Michael Portillo is up next on GB News for continued reaction to today's press conference. Just to remind you, both suspects who are in prison, who are in custody, are British-born. Let's go now to the weather.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, this is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Many of us will actually get a decent dose of sunshine over the course of today. We're actually in between weather systems at the moment. Got one waiting in the wing for next week and one that's just clearing off the far southeast of England. But in between that, many of us will get off with a reasonably dry day overall. However, the exception to that is the far northwest of Scotland, where we do have some quite frequent showers and areas of rain pushing through, some coastal gales for the Highlands over towards the Northern Isles later on as well. Some of those could turn thundery in the mixture as well. But apart from a few scattered showers just drifting into western coast elsewhere, there'll be a good amount of sunshine, but even in that sunshine it's going to still feel fairly cool, highs of only 12-13 degrees Celsius in the south and more around 10 to 11 degrees Celsius further north. The sunshine will increasingly disappear as well from the west as we head into the afternoon and evening period. The cloud is going to be building. Initially for Northern Ireland, Wales, down towards southwestern England, but it will spread in across all areas of the UK as we head into the overnight period. This coming with areas of rain, actually quite heavy and persistent over some hills, particularly across parts of northwestern England. But this is also filtering in some much milder air. So whilst it could be a little bit of a chilly evening, by dawn on Monday morning it is going to be seeing temperatures in double digits for the vast majority of us. So a very mild start to Monday, but also a very cloudy one and a very unsettled one with areas of rain continuing to push through. Again, always the most persistent out towards the west. Generally the further east that you are, you might see some sunshine just breaking through that cloud at times, generally holding on to some of the drier interludes as well. But it's going to be a very windy day and still very mild as well. Temperatures around 15 to 16 degrees Celsius, notably above where we should be for this time of year. And the unsettled but mild theme is looking to continue right throughout this week. Bye-bye.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boiler sponsors the weather on GB News.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. The breaking news overnight, 2 British nationals have been arrested in connection with a mass stabbing on board a train that was travelling between Doncaster and London. British Transport Police has said that they're not treating this as a terrorist incident. The police have confirmed that there is a 32-year-old male who is a black British national and a 35-year-old male who is a British national of Caribbean descent currently in custody. Eyewitnesses reported scenes of panic, with one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from the carnage. My thoughts are with all those affected, and my thanks go to the emergency services for their response. Anyone in the area should follow the advice of the police. I think that's the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying that. Sorry, that was the message from the King. And Sir Keir Starmer said his thoughts are with all those affected and praised the emergency services for their swift response. Meanwhile, the King, His Majesty, has also commented on the attack. The King said, "My wife and I were truly appalled and shocked to hear of the dreadful knife attack that took place on board a train in Cambridgeshire last night. Our deepest sympathy and thoughts are with all of those affected and their loved ones. We're particularly grateful to the emergency services for their response to this awful incident." Superintendent for the British Transport Police, John Lovelace, spoke at a press conference just a few minutes ago.
It's a shocking incident, and first and foremost, my thoughts are with the family and friends of those who've been affected and those who are injured. At approximately 7:42 p.m. yesterday evening, there were calls to the police service in relation to multiple stabbings which took place on board a train service that departed Doncaster at 6:25 p.m. and was en route to London King's Cross Station. Officers immediately attended Huntington Station alongside paramedics, where armed police officers from Cambridgeshire Police boarded the train and arrested 2 people. Within 8 minutes of the 999 call being made, 2 men were brought into police custody, where they remain this morning. I can tell you that these are the first male, a 32-year-old male, a black British national, and a 35-year-old man, a British national of Caribbean descent. They were both arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. Both were born in the United Kingdom. As stated, they remain this morning in separate police stations for questioning. 10 people were taken to hospital by ambulance, and another person self-presented later that evening. While 9 were initially believed to have life-threatening injuries, following assessment and treatment, 4, thankful to say, have been discharged. However, 2 patients remain in a life-threatening condition. British Transport Police declared a major incident yesterday, and counter-terrorism policing were initially supporting our investigation. However, at this stage, there is nothing to suggest that this is a terrorist incident. This is a British Transport Police investigation, and we continue to work to establish at pace the full circumstances and the motivations that have led to this incident. At this early stage, it would not be appropriate to speculate on the cause of this incident. As you can see, the station this morning remains closed. However, we expect trains to be passing through the station this morning. Passengers will see a high visibility presence of police officers at stations and on trains throughout today, up and down the transport network. Our officers are there to reassure the public and to address any concerns they may have. I'd like to thank the public personally for their patience and their cooperation. Yesterday evening, which has already greatly assisted our investigation through the help the public have tendered, as well as the multi-agency response partners from colleagues in other blue light services. I'd like to extend my thanks to our colleagues within Cambridgeshire Police, the East of England Ambulance Service, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service, and counter-terrorism policing. And finally, I'd like to appeal for anyone that's watching who has information connected to yesterday's incident, however big or small you feel that may be, that has not yet spoken to police, to make contact. You can do so by texting the British Transport Police on 61016, that's 61016, quoting reference 663 of the 1st of November 2025.
So that was Superintendent John Lovelace. He was speaking a few minutes ago. He was standing at Huntingdon Station. And joining us now live from Huntingdon Station is GB News national reporter Jack Carson. A very interesting update by the police there. Jack, anything to add?
Yeah, well, certainly it was an update we'd been hoping for very much in these cases. The last police statement we'd got before that update was just after midnight last night, so there was very much, speculation on social media, urges for people not to speculate, and this vacuum of information seemingly appearing. So we were hoping for an update, not just on the two suspects that we heard that remain in police custody, arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, but also those people that, of course, were involved in this attack and had been taken to the hospital with what were described as life-threatening injuries. So it is positive news to know that of those 9 people who were taken to hospital with life-threatening injuries, 4 have been discharged and 2 remain in a life-threatening condition. Also, a small update that an 11th person had been taken to hospital last night. We've been talking this morning about the huge response from the emergency services and how quick they were able to respond. You heard there the superintendent saying within 8 minutes of the 999 call being made, they'd not only arrived here at the station, but they'd also arrested the 2 people who remain in custody this morning. And interesting, they have named not only those 2 people with their ages, a 32-year-old male and a 35-year-old male, but also they are both black British nationals, one of them being of Caribbean descent. And in the reaction that we've had from across the political spectrum, and as you told everyone a short while ago, Michael, around the King also saying how truly appalled both him and his wife were to hear of the dreadful knife attack that took place on board this train last night. They, of course, convey their deepest sympathies and thoughts with those affected and their loved ones. They also point out their gratefulness for the emergency services and their response to what they described as an awful incident. The police headquarters is just a short drive from here, and also the Addenbrooke's Hospital not far away from here either. So that emergency response was able to be so quick and no doubt has impacted the ability of those emergency teams treating those people that were involved in this attack, and meaning that is why so many have already, as last night being described as having life-threatening injuries, 4 already being able to be discharged from hospital this morning. That is, of course, very positive news for those involved, because we heard from the eyewitness accounts that we were getting out of the station here last night, people that were on board that train waiting to give their own statements to the police, also, of course, posting online and telling of media that were here last night just how horrific the attack was. Talk of how many were running through the train trying to get away from this attack. We've already heard, Michael, this morning, the talks of how heroic some of those people were, quite literally getting in the way of other people being attacked to try and protect them, but also the horrifying scenes of reaching the end of a train. You can only go so far on a train before you reach the point at which you can go no further, and talked of all those people that had ran through the carriages trying to find anything they could, not knowing what was going to come through the carriage doors, trying to find anything they could, including what was reported as somebody grabbing a Jack Daniel's whiskey bottle, anything to try and fend off those attackers as they seemingly made their way through the train carriages. But it was at that point that the train arrived in Huntingdon. It is quite a short journey from Peterborough to Huntingdon Station, only about kind of 10-15 minutes or so, certainly at the speed that these LNER Azuma trains go to. Of course, it had left Doncaster at 6:25. It wasn't due to stop at Huntingdon, but the driver made that emergency call to stop here and allow, of course, the police to board this train, and that is ultimately what no doubt saved more countless lives compared to the train possibly continuing on the tracks, but also, of course, as the emergency response. As we heard from that press conference, within 8 minutes of that call, they were not only here on site, but they also had arrested the 2 people that remain in police custody this morning.
Thank you very much indeed, Jack. I thought it was quite interesting. Obviously, there's been great praise of the emergency services for the speed of the response that you've just highlighted, but also Superintendent John Lovelace was paying tribute to the public, saying how very helpful already the testimony of those people who witnessed the incident had been. So, with me now, I think down the line, is retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector Hamish Brown. Hamish, are you there?
Michael, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hamish. Thank you for joining us at short notice. So I was just making that point, which I thought Jack might pick up, but perhaps you would instead. The emergency services have been praised for the speed of the response. Apparently, within 8 minutes of the 999 call, they had arrested 2 suspects. That's extraordinary. But the police also are going out of their way this morning to praise the public for the value of the testimony that has been coming in. And I suppose one might add to that, as it were, a plea to the public to keep giving information if anybody has it.
Well, I entirely agree with you. It was outstanding, the response and how police and other blue light services dealt with this appalling incident. So well done to them. And of course, the train driver getting the train pretty quickly to Huntingdon Station and stopping there. So he behaved very responsibly, really. But something I really want to pick up on is a comment you made right at the beginning about the superintendent or chief superintendent saying it wasn't a terrorist incident. Well, there's a caveat with that at this stage, so they're going to keep an open mind about it. But I'm pleased that they have put out the ethnicity and birthplace of both suspects. We saw appalling scenes such as Southport and what have you, people completely getting the wrong end of the stick, and the terrible issues were exacerbated by severe public order matters. So in this particular case, it's going to be contained. So it's for the police to investigate a very serious attempted murder. They'll be looking at eyewitnesses, those who can speak to the police at the moment. Not everyone was injured, thank goodness, so they'll be taking statements from them, and you and the chief superintendent are absolutely right. If you've got any information at all, please get in contact with the police. But there's probably CCTV from the train itself and maybe members of the public, so that will all add to the evidence and any forensic evidence which is there. So the police will put that case together. But what is troubling, and I think they're going to get to the bottom of this, what is this about? At the moment, we're 12 hours on, they're saying they're not treating it as a terrorist incident. So why? And the police got a lot of work to do, work on the suspects' backgrounds. We'll have to see if they disclose who the people are. Maybe the public can say something about them. But they may well be looking at searching addresses. Is there evidence there? So a lot on the police plate, but we're putting all this together, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it. And then the Crown Prosecution Service, of course, will be brought in probably now. They'll be aware of it, and the case file will go, and charges as appropriate will be preferred.
I noted very carefully what Superintendent John Lovelace said. What he said was that there was nothing, note the word nothing, to suggest a terror incident. I assume the police would not go so far as say nothing to suggest a terror incident if they thought they were going to have to retract on that fairly smartish. I wonder, though, whether some members of the public at the moment would think that these are semantics with which they don't identify. I mean, what has happened is a really horrific event has occurred on a train. People have been terrorised, and let's face it, we all feel terrorised this morning. You know, everybody, quite naturally, is thinking about the next time they get on a train or the next time, indeed, they go out in public. So I suppose these semantics serve some purposes, But many members of the public today will be saying, well, however this incident is defined, it was absolutely terrifying, and I personally am very frightened.
I can understand that entirely. And what I was pleased to hear was the Chief Superintendent saying that for the next few days, certainly, there will be a heightened police presence on the trains just to reassure people. And dreadful as these things are, you know, we've all got to get on with our lives and try and do that. But it's a challenge for the public. It might be a challenge for the railway staff as well. So, yes, I'm pleased the police will be out there. They won't be able to stay there forever, of course. But that public confidence, that reassurance the police can give, and I think everyone would agree, we'd like to see far more of that in our high streets and all over the place. More police officers, please. But certainly immediate steps on the train and really pacify members of the public, and please get back on with your lives.
I mean, public confidence has, in previous incidents, bounced back. I mean, let's not forget that London was hit by simultaneous terrorist incidents on the date that we call 7/7, I think it was in 2005, where a lot of people lost their lives. We've had other incidents on transport. In Spain, there were major terrorist incidents on trains, but people go back to travelling. So public confidence somehow does bounce back. And I understand that anybody who's been a policeman thinks that they should make the case for there to be a greater police presence. But we all know that that cannot be the solution to the safety of trains. You cannot have a policeman on every train. And even if you did, the police officer would not necessarily be in the right carriage where the incident was occurring. So I think that is just, I think that's barking up the wrong tree, actually. Probably what we need to be most reassured about is intelligence, because where an incident is not, as it were, spontaneous, which this one may have been, we want to know that people are tracking what's going on in society so that we can be warned about incidents that may occur.
Well, it's a bit of a jigsaw, really, dealing with crime and reassuring the public. You're quite right. There aren't enough police officers, and we might not get many more, so they have to be used sparingly. But at the same time, they've probably got to be reassured the police are doing something about ongoing crime, violent crime, and that intelligence is absolutely essential, whether it's terrorist related or not. And can we try, or can the police and the other authorities deal with this before it all goes terribly wrong? It's a hard call, you know, but certainly the criminal intelligence sides, maybe MI5 as well, they should be working together. And are people coming to light in circumstances which are very worrying? And the last thing we want is someone to say, oh, I always thought they were going to do that, but actually did very little about it. Before I retired, and it was some years ago, I worked on a project of murder suppression. Could we see, or could we work out who was going to go and commit the next serious crime? The difficulty was, it was a good idea, but the difficulty was there really wasn't the staff to support looking at people who might commit a crime, as opposed to having police officers investigating where a crime has been committed. So yes, you're absolutely right. Public to be reassured, that's going on in the background, the criminal intelligence. But also, and I stand by this, the police presence will mean everything. And maybe the guard walking through the train and things like that, give people just that reassurance.
Thank you, Hamish Brown, retired Detective Inspector from Scotland Yard. My panel has been waiting patiently. I introduce them now. Former Labour Party Chair, Baroness Hayter, and Policy Fellow of Onward, Andrew Barclay. Welcome both of you to GBNews this morning. Diane, everything is political, I'm afraid, isn't it? And how do you think politicians can best respond to this incident? We've had the assurance from the police that nothing suggests it's a terror incident, but it is a terrifying incident, and people are worried about crime as well as about terrorism. What on earth can a government do to reassure people today?
There's two things I'd say about that. I mean, firstly, I just want to say about the police. You know, here we are wearing our poppies, reminding what people did for us before, and watching those police run towards this incident, I thought was stunning. I think, though, the response has to be, first of all, reassurance. You know, there are 1.5 billion passenger journeys a year on the railways, and all of us who've done that, whether it's commuting or only using the trains for holidays, we feel very safe in that, and that is normal. So I do think we have to make sure that people don't think this is something that could happen all the time. So I think the government must do something about reassurance. I think that's really important.
What would that something be, do you think, Diane?
Well, I think we have to go out there saying, you know, that this doesn't normally happen. You know, if we're not careful, we'll see these pictures again and again, and there will be passengers for whom the 1st of November 2025 will never be forgotten. You know, they will always know where they were on the 1st of November. But for most of us, our train journeys are safe, and I think government needs to keep saying that. But the second thing, of course, from what we hear, and we don't know the full details, but there were large knives involved. So when, you know, it looks as if that it's not just a penknife or flick knife coming out at the last moment. And I do think there is something about the culture that's grown up of people carrying large knives with them. So I do think it's time to start really looking about the buying and the carrying of knives. Now, this could have been guns instead of that, but we've got laws in this country that stop people carrying guns. I think now it's probably time to look at knives. But this could have happened...
I thought we had looked at knives. I mean, for example, I can't get a knife through the post without producing evidence of my age. I think you can't buy a knife in a shop without producing evidence of age. But the problem in the end is that a knife is something we all need for cooking. And a cooking knife is also, coincidentally, a lethal weapon. What on earth do you do about that?
Well, I do think that, you know, carrying one other than when you're, you know, taking it from the shop home is a little bit suspicious about why you'd be carried. Well, I mean, you said earlier about the importance of intelligence. Yes, and we should be looking. And, you know, if you find someone carrying a knife for no good reason, then I think it is time to take them to one side and really find out, or take the knife off them. Because other than when you're shopping, that's the risk. It's not about trains that are the risk. This could have happened on a bus. It could have happened in a shopping area. It happened to be a train. So I think it's important that we don't put too much focus on where it happened, albeit for today. As I say, those passengers will never forget where they were yesterday. But the issue is, and we're not talking about age here, of course, we're talking about almost middle-aged men in their 30s who could therefore have bought a knife online quite easily. But let's think about the people who did it and what they were using, rather than about where it happened to take place, which was a railway carriage, which is normally very safe.
Andrew Barclay, if you were a politician today, how would you react? I mean, what strikes me about Diane's approach, which I perfectly understand, but you know, if a minister gets up and tries, as it were, the statistical approach, you know, this has been one incident, 1.5 billion passengers a year, it's most unlikely to happen to you. Does that strike the right tone?
No, in my view, we need to take a much harder line towards the prevention of this national trend, which is knife crime, which does feel like it's growing, and it might have happened on a train or a bus, as you said, but it's part of a worrying trend that most law-abiding citizens are living in fear about. And I think that we once upon a time had quite a hardline approach to stop and search, certainly in London, and I think it's about time that the police were given the political instruction to go and start that all over again, because a lot of this comes, or is at least initiated, in certain areas, in certain geographies. It's not elderly ladies in Richmond who are buying and carrying knives. It's coming from certain areas, and we must get back to this prevention of knife crime and take a really hard-line approach to that, because that's how you reassure the public.
I wonder if we're all guilty in a way, because there is a lot of knife crime, and we may be tempted to say, well, this is happening within gangs, so, you know, that doesn't, as it were, bother the rest of us. Or this may be happening amongst teenagers, which is, you know, particularly tragic. But again, you know, it doesn't kind of affect the rest of us. It is quite unusual for knife crime to spill out in this entirely arbitrary way, where bystanders are being, mown down by an attacker. And this maybe is going to be a wake-up call and make us think that, if there are any ways of controlling the carrying of knives, I think maybe more than the possession or the buying of knives, those need to be tried. I mean, do you think that this incident is going to produce some sort of big change?
Well, I certainly hope so, because how many more of these type of knife crime incidents do we need to tolerate before there is a hard line taken towards the prevention? And it is hard to police the buying of them, as you said, because everyone needs a kitchen knife. But from what we know so far about this incident, this wasn't kitchen knives, this was machete-style knives. And I think it would be very wise for the authorities to go above and beyond to now provide...
I think you've gone too far there. I don't think we do know that.
Oh, OK, I thought that's
we know it's a large knife.
Oh, OK, fine, large knives. Anyway, I think that it would go a long way if the public felt that the authorities were now taking a very firm and visible line towards the prevention of the carrying of knives, rather than once it's already happened.
Yeah. I mean, the history of stop and search, as we all know, is that it was regarded by certain parts of the community as being discriminatory. On the other hand, I mean, if you're not profiling at all, I mean, you get into the business of, having to stop old ladies and old gentlemen and minors because you're trying to treat everyone the same way, and that, in its own way, becomes absurd. What is the way through that conundrum? I mean, if we're going to use police resources effectively to stop people carrying knives around, and if they carry knives around, then there's the potential for a crime. But what is the solution to that problem?
Well, I think, first of all, any law-abiding citizen, I think, wouldn't mind too much being stopped and searched if they're not carrying a knife in any case. I don't think it's part of the consequence of the police. I think everyone can understand that and buy into that you wouldn't have a problem with stop and search being conducted and a certain amount of profiling, whether that's by race or geography, if it was in the name of making society safer. And what about the discrimination for the several people who have now got life-threatening injuries on the train? So I think we're now at a stage where actually this is happening, it feels like, fairly regularly, and there is I think, a public will to take a much harder line and bring back these preventative measures.
Diane Hayter, I think the panel will return later. You'll have another opportunity to comment, but very briefly now, what would be your reaction to what you've heard?
I think the intelligence, which you said at the beginning, but the other thing is I travel mostly on buses in London, and there is CCTV everywhere, and I think that's really good. If this was to have happened in a London bus, for example, the police would have the pictures pretty quickly. Now, I don't know whether that's the case on all trains, but I do think that likelihood of getting caught is also very important. So I think that is something that could be looked at not just on transport, but in shopping areas and that. I have no fear of CCTV. I know some people have said, oh, that's an infringement on personal liberty. Seems to me, if you know your picture's going to be caught, that's a great way of stopping people breaking the law.
Baroness Hayter, Andrew Barclay, thank you very much. I anticipate that we'll have you back, but obviously it's all slightly unpredictable at the moment. Let me remind you viewers of the breaking news. 2 British nationals have been arrested in connection with a mass stabbing on board a train that was travelling between Doncaster and London. The British Transport Police has said that they are not treating it as a terrorist incident. The police confirmed that there's a 32-year-old male who is a black British national and a 35-year-old male who's a British national of Caribbean descent, currently in custody. Eyewitnesses reported scenes of panic, with one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from the carriage where that was occurring. Now, here's Keir Starmer's statement. My thoughts are with those affected, and my thanks go to the emergency services for their response. Anyone in the area should follow the advice of the police. In his statement, Sir Keir Starmer said that his thoughts are with those affected. And meanwhile, the King, His Majesty, has also commented on the attack. He said, my wife and I were truly appalled and shocked to hear of the dreadful knife attack that took place on board a train in Cambridgeshire last night. Our deepest sympathy and thoughts are with all those affected and their loved ones. We are particularly grateful to the emergency services for their response to this awful incident. Now, I'm joined by former Transport Police Officer Gary Hayes. Gary, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to GB News. Good morning to you. In one way, you must be pleased that praise is being heaped on the British Transport Police and other services. It seems that by stopping the train at Huntingdon, it stopped very close to where armed officers were available to attend the scene. And this does seem to be pretty much a model of fast and effective response.
Yeah, absolutely. I think clearly we need to have in our thoughts, as been mentioned earlier, those that have been injured in this attack, but the response from the emergency services was as it should be, first class. The men and women of our emergency services rushing forward clearly as people were trying to get away from this horrible incident. Ironically, I was with Cambridgeshire Police at Huntingdon only 2 weeks ago delivering a presentation for my charity PTSD 999. And I can only begin to imagine now how those officers will be feeling that were the first on scene and dealing with this horrific scene before them.
It's also, in my view, quite remarkable that presumably a suspect carrying a knife was tasered. We understand that armed police officers attended, but he wasn't shot with a gun, he was tasered. And all of that requires very considerable exposure to danger by the police officer who's handling the taser.
Absolutely. I was a former taser officer myself. And when you're dealing with situations like this, it's a matter of seconds, even shorter than that, for you to react to that ongoing situation. Now, clearly, in the best interest of safety and the public safety, the officer deployed a taser, and rightly so, using the appropriate use of force and detained that individual. And once that individual was obviously placed in the handcuffs, obviously more assistance would have been arriving. The necessity to use firearms was clearly considered if the firearms units were on scene at that time. But the use of taser clearly works in this incident. And, full praise to the officer for deploying his taser or her taser in a very stressful situation.
Gary, we have a thing called the British Transport Police. Some viewers might be quite confused about that. The British Transport Police polices the railway system. It is a distinct police force with its own cadre of officers and its own leadership. In a situation like this, is that a useful thing, or is it possibly bureaucratic overlap? I understand the investigation is being conducted by the British Transport Police. Is there the possibility of confusion? Because obviously Cambridgeshire Police are also involved.
I think as a former British Transport Police officer myself, we're very much not sort of a known police service within the grander scheme of police operations. BTP police the rail network up and down the UK and basically paid for by the train operating companies. However, officers have the exact same rights and powers of arrest as any other police officer in the country. They are there to keep the network safe. And as was mentioned earlier on, 2005 London bombings, BTP were heavily involved in that. I was part of the mortuary resilience team dealing with the aftermath of that. But if this is to be a terrorist-related incident, then the counter-terrorism policing, i.e. Metropolitan Police, will take primacy. Cambridgeshire Police, clearly being as close as they were to this main station, were there very quickly, along with colleagues from the British Transport Police, and dealt with the incident in a very professional manner.
Just picking up on your comment there, and those watching rather than listening will be able to see the strap on the line. Police are saying that the knife attack is not terrorism. The police officer for the British Transport Police earlier said there was nothing to suggest that it was a terror incident. Gary, you still there?
Yeah, so with that in mind then, Michael, if this is not a CT-related incident, BTP will probably take primacy in relation to dealing with the two suspects. It's an ongoing investigation, clearly, and the facts and the evidence needs to be determined before, obviously, charges are brought, as was mentioned earlier. So at the moment, the British Transport Police will be gathering as much evidence, forensically and otherwise, and witness statements from everyone that was there and sadly injured during that process.
Gary, does it occur to you as a former British Transport Police officer of any way that such incidents could be prevented? I mean, when we get on Eurostars, and indeed when we get on high-speed trains in the continent of Europe, we go through scanners, a bit like airport scanners. But that's not practical, is it, even for intercity travel?
No, the practicality of using those knife arches and screening processes, it just wouldn't happen. The cost, clearly, that's always a major factor, sadly. And there's just not enough officers to ensure that these operations are run on a daily basis, even more so having BTP officers on those services. So it's the BTP are very restricted purely by numbers. And these such incidents, thankfully, are not a regular occurrence on the rail network. However, I'm sure there will be a heavy presence at hub stations now from the BTP. Intelligence will be shared, and I'm sure that you will be seeing a lot more policing around major hub stations as we speak.
Thank you very much. That's Gary Hayes, former British Transport Police officer. Jack Carson, I think, is still at Huntingdon Station. Let's go back and hear from him. He's our GB News national reporter. Any update for us, Jack?
Well, we have seen more forensic officers enter the train platform carrying those clear plastic bags, which, of course, are synonymous with them collecting evidence. So we have seen, a very active police investigation this morning as those forensic officers continue to conduct their own searches for evidence, their own collection of evidence and photographing of evidence as well. We've seen that. We've seen some black tarpaulin seemingly laid across part of the road by the station, and then another forensic investigator come and take photos of that evidence that they have collected, and it's all part of the British Transport Police investigation, of course, to try and build up a picture of exactly what happened here and exactly what may well be involved in this incident. We heard that update from Superintendent John Lovelace from the British Transport Police an hour or so ago, who confirmed that within 8 minutes of that 999 call being made at 7:42 p.m, the police had attended the station here and made 2 arrests of suspects who they then confirmed have been arrested, both of them on suspicion of attempted murder. They are a 32-year-old male who is a black British national and a 35-year-old male who is a British national, they say, of Caribbean descent. They say they were both born in the UK and, as I was saying, arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. But importantly, confirmation, because we know from the statement last night that counter-terrorism police were brought in last night as part of the early stage of the investigation, very much because at that stage they hadn't yet had a chance, of course, to speak to the suspects they'd arrested and taken into custody, had a chance to establish any kind of motivation around this. But important to note that in that press conference they said that there was nothing to suggest that this was a terrorist incident. They do confirm that this is a British Transport Police investigation. They are continuing to work to establish at the full pace, they say, that at pace the full circumstances and motivations which have led to this incident. So important to note that they have said that at this stage there is nothing to suggest that this is a terrorist incident. But we know that in the aftermath of that 999 call, the procedure came in called Operation Plato. Now, that is a national police protocol for responding to what is known as a marauding terrorist attack. That involves an attack of no notice, they say, with a high threat to life. So that was the protocol which was introduced on the back of that 999 call, given that there was, of course, reports to the police of multiple stabbings on the train. And we know that armed officers arrived here at the train station and on the platform, of course, to arrest those 2 people who remain in police custody this morning. But the local MP, Ben Obese-Ejekti, who is the local MP here, he spoke to us a little earlier on. Take a listen to what he told us.
This is a truly shocking incident. I arrived at just after 9 o'clock last night when the incident was still being dealt with by the emergency services. It was clear that a major incident was taking place as I arrived. There must have been 20 to 30 police cars, around 10 ambulances still dealing with casualties at that point, as well as fire services as well. And so credit to the emergency services for such a robust response. It's very reassuring to see that they were able to deal with it so effectively. I only know what's been publicly released, around 10 casualties, 9 of which were life-threatening injuries. I think your point about the station, it is a 14-minute journey from Peterborough to Huntingdon. This train wasn't originally due to stop at Huntingdon. It was due to be on the fast track and go on to Stevenage, which is around another 10 to 15 minutes away. So I think one of the aspects that we must be mindful of is the swift action of both the driver and the signallers, who were able to move the train onto these slower tracks so that it was able to stop at Huntingdon and passengers were able to escape and the police were able to respond. Had they not been able to do that, it could have been a much worse incident. We've got a lot of stations that don't even have conductors selling tickets, so I think it's unrealistic to think that we could start checking people, airport-style security, and also I don't think we want to be the sort of country that needs to have airport-style security at train stations. I think everybody should be worried that incidents like this can happen anywhere in the country, and this isn't, as you say, this isn't a major metropolitan area. This is a market town in semi-rural Cambridgeshire. Incidents like this just simply do not happen here. So everyone must be vigilant and must be mindful. But at the same time, I think I'd like to reassure people that we have a police force who is able to deal with this incident swiftly and robustly and bring it into order. But I would like to reassure people that this is a rarity, and we are simply have been unlucky in this instance. But this is not something that's going to happen again.
Yeah, of course, interesting there, trying to reassure the public, of course, the call from within 8 minutes of getting that call to respond shows how immediate the response was, and very much that is probably what helped to allow 4 of the 9 people who were taken to hospital last night with what were described as life-threatening injuries. 4 of those have been able to be discharged, and that I think is a testament and a credit to the emergency response and the paramedics about how quickly they're able to not only be on scene but treat those people, get them to hospital. And of course now 4 of those, as I was saying, 4 of those of the 9 who were taken to hospital last night have been able to be discharged, but 2 remain, Michael, in a life-threatening condition.
Thank you very much, Jack Carson. Jack Carson at Huntingdon Station. And I think I observed in at least one of those live clips high-speed trains moving through the station. We were told that train services would resume on the line, although Huntingdon Station, of course, remains closed. Joining me now, counter-terrorism specialist Paul Birch. Paul Birch, welcome to GB News.
Good morning.
In a way, slightly ironic to speak to a counter-terrorism specialist when the police at the scene have said that there is nothing to suggest that this is terrorism. So, how do you think, in the 13 or 14 hours since the incident, they determined that?
Well, the first thought would have been that it was a terrorist-related incident. And as your previous guests have said, counter-terrorist police were called in the first instance because such attacks are very, very rare. And the first instinct would be that this would be, as Jack said, a Plato-type counter-terrorist incident. But they would have discussed this with passengers. They would have talked to members of staff, and probably now, after 13, 14 hours, they would have talked to the suspects involved, and they would get a picture of what built up to the incident and what led to it. I must admit, my first thought, I'm surprised that it's been declared something other than a terrorist incident, and I'd be really, really interested to see what the motivation was for this attack. Because as I understand it, it did seem pretty random, like they were going through the carriages just attacking random people. So you do get them. You do get these incidents. If you remember, in 2010, you had the taxi driver Derek Bird went on a shooting rampage in Cumbria. And in that case, the armed officers were a good few hours away. So he was unfortunately allowed to sort of continue his rampage unchecked. Whereas this one, You're right by Cambridgeshire Police Headquarters, so armed officers were on the scene very, very quickly. And you're not far from Adam Brooks Hospital either, which is a world-leading trauma centre. So this, it seems it's strange to say, but this could have been a whole lot worse. But I think what they will be trying to establish is what the motive was, if this isn't terrorism, what led to what seemingly a random attack of passengers on the train.
Yes. I mean, thank goodness that the police do not think it's terrorism. Of course, if it were terrorism, they would follow up leads and they might uncover all sorts of things. They might pull the thread and it would lead to other things. So that doesn't seem to be the process here. So as far as you're concerned, your memory of how things were policed, the procedure now, if it is decided that it is not a terrorist incident, is wholly different from the procedure that would be followed if it were.
Yes, I mean, if terrorism was the motive or the perceived motive, and even in this case, what they will probably be doing now in the day and age in which we live, they will be looking through the social media of the suspects, looking for any sort of inkling that they might be politically motivated in some way. They will, everyone now has an online footprint, so they'll be doing that. And in this case, a lot of it will be coming through interviews of the suspects, I would imagine, in the police station, because we do need to understand what the motive was, and if there's anything that could be drawn from this that would prevent something like that occurring in the future. But as your previous guests have said, in terms of prevention of things like this, it's very, very difficult. It's probably unrealistic to have knife arches at every rural railway station. You'd have absolute commuter chaos if everyone had to go through airport-style security to get on a commuter train. So, yes, they're talking to the suspects and talking to the eyewitnesses, establishing with eyewitnesses and victims, once they're able to talk, what happened leading up to this would be crucial in establishing what the motive was if it's not terrorism. But again, even if it isn't, they will be going through the backgrounds of the two suspects extensively with a fine-tooth comb. They will be searching the addresses of the suspects, talking to friends and relatives of the suspects in order to establish what the motive was. Whether it's a mental health issue, we don't yet know. But all this would take place either, as it's such a serious event, things will be done in a very, very similar way, I would suggest, to what if it was a terrorist incident, because ultimately the effect is the same. Lots and lots of people are hurt. Thankfully, no one has been killed, but the effects are very, very similar to a terrorist attack.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Paul Birch. As though to emphasise the importance of that, we've had statements from the Prime Minister, we've had a statement from His Majesty the King. The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has released an updated statement. She said, after last night's horrific attack, my thoughts today are with the victims, their friends and family. My deepest thanks go to the British Transport Police, Cambridgeshire Police, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service and the East of England Ambulance Service. They responded rapidly with the utmost professionalism and they saved lives. I'd also like to pay tribute to the exceptional bravery of staff and passengers on the train. We now know this attack is not being treated as terrorism and that two British-born British nationals have been arrested. The investigation is ongoing and I'm receiving regular updates from the police. A political reaction here from the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey. He said, I'm horrified by the dreadful attack on passengers aboard the train near Huntingdon. My thoughts are with all those affected, the victims who we are all praying will pull through, their loved ones and everyone who witnessed such a shocking event. At a moment of such fear and chaos, we also saw extraordinary bravery. The stories of passengers who stepped forward to protect others embody the very best of Britain, a country where ordinary people stand together in the face of danger, look out for one another and refuse to be cowed by violence. My panel has patiently waited here. Former Labour Party Chair Baroness Hayter and Policy Fellow at Onward, Andrew Barclay. Andrew, what do you make of the evolving situation? The Home Secretary there very quick to underline that it's not being treated as a terror incident. Home Secretary very quick to underline that the people who have been arrested, who are suspects, are British-born. So an effort here to clamp down on this thing getting out of hand, people making wrong assumptions, starting to talk about asylum seekers or anything like that. The political instinct is, apart from being very concerned about those who've been injured, also to make sure that people focus on the reality of what's happened, not some fantasy of what's happened.
Yeah, and I think it's right that they've tried to come out and provide a bit of clarity. It's obviously going to be important that they continue with that and are very transparent as and when they know more about the suspects and the motives behind those, and they continue in the spirit of clarity and transparency, because, as you said, without that, fear and panic can spread. I think the second point is, more so than thoughts and prayers at the end of this, there is a general sense of national anxiety around crime, knife crime, and the feeling that no one's really in charge. So I think more so than just well wishes and thoughts and prayers at the end of it, I think it would be really good to see the government display to the public a firm hand, and they're going to take a firm stance on the rising trend of crime and knife crime, much more so than any government has done in recent years. I think we need to get back to a much tougher stance on that.
Diane Hayter, would you describe the police statement that we heard? I think it was just came out to 11 o'clock, wasn't it? We heard the police statement. Would you say that was exemplary? Do you think it covered the ground? Do you think it clarified what was known? Was that the proper way for the police to proceed?
I think it was proper. I thought also the very tone that, I think Lovelace was his name, wasn't it, Mr. Lovelace? I thought his tone was, it sounded like Dixon Green. It sounded like your Bobby. I thought the tone that he said, unhurried, talking to the public, was absolutely the right one, and I think that's good. And I think the public are really important. I mean, one of the differences here, it's not just that where it was, and it was near a hospital, of course. We all have mobile phones, and it was probably a passenger or more than one passenger using their mobile, dialing 999, that started this, triggered the reaction that has saved life. And I think that the public, I mean, Ed Davey has just pointed out, and we heard a case of a man putting himself between the knife and a young woman. The public respond in times like this. I was on a tube on 7/7, not on the tube, and what I saw walking around London, it was a really dreadful day that day, was people just coming out, helping, offering tea and coffee, looking after people who were stuck in London. And I do think that the public need to be thanked for their response to this, but also, as one of the other people was saying, to watch out and not be afraid to lift their phone if they see something that looks a bit odd and dial 999. I know the police much prefer that we over-alert than if we don't, and then afterwards think, oh, I had thought that was funny. So I think that the police being able to talk human, if you like, to the public, and us not seeing it just their responsibility, but all our responsibility is important. And I think they set the tone well.
Andrew Barclay, I mean, one of the consequences of this not being regarded as a terror incident is that we don't need to think that there's a terror campaign, when there's no reason to believe that, you know, what was done to that train yesterday will be done by another cell in the same terrorist organisation to another train. So that's quite an important conclusion, it seems to me. There's no reason to believe that this incident would be repeated elsewhere if it wasn't a terrorist incident. I'll tell you something that I have noticed, even this morning actually, is that Britons who are living abroad now have the idea that we live in an entirely lawless country. Yeah. Because I live here and I'm here most of the time, I think I put these things in perspective, and I continue to think this is an absolutely wonderful country to live in, despite lots of challenges and difficulties and many things that I'm dissatisfied with. I still regard it as a wonderful country. But I think there's no doubt at all that the reputation of our country abroad is suffering very badly. And there is now a sort of caricature of how dangerous and how horrid Britain is, which I suspect must be doing us some damage.
I think it definitely is doing us some damage. And I think we do live in a wonderful country, But equally, there is, I mean, I've been subjected to phone muggings and street crimes, and almost everyone I know has either a first-hand story or they know someone who has been. So whilst it might be getting somewhat safer in by some statistics, the sense and the feeling of the British public is that it is a bit lawless. And I think that's what's translating abroad, especially with so many people now from this country leaving to start up lives elsewhere. I think there is this sort of this perspective of Britain becoming lawless, becoming a declining country, and displaying those symptoms. And I think that, again, apart from making the country safer, I think it's really important that the government go above and beyond to showcase that they are taking a really tough stance and that everyone can feel a lot safer. The optics of this will matter as well.
Diane Hayter, are you aware of this reputational damage?
Yes, I think it's very wrong. I mean, more people will have been...
First of all, are you aware of it before you say whether it's wrong or
yes,
right?
Yes, because I read the press and I read the foreign press and stuff like that.
Yes.
And I think it's very wrong. I mean, you know, more people were killed in New York this morning, you know, than this from that sort of thing, statistically. And, you know, OK, I live in the middle of London. I walk home late at night. I'm in the House of Lords and we often stay there till midnight. But, you know, I've never felt unsafe walking around. I take public transport all the time. So I think we have to be very careful not to make people think that it's not safe out there. I think most of us are incredibly safe and certainly compared with many other countries. So don't talk down Britain is also my message.
Of course, I mean, it does partly depend on who you are and where you live. I mean, I would echo your remarks. I live in central London. But, you know, teenagers in parts of London must feel extremely unsafe because kids are taking knives into school and disputes are being resolved by people being stabbed. Now, you and I are not prone to that, but this is, we're not in danger of that, but this is all feeding into the reputation of our country.
It is, and unfortunately it is youth on youth, if you like, quite a lot. There's a subculture there which we have to do more in the way of I think Andrew said prevention. This is about the equivalent of when you and I were young, youth clubs and activities and role models that offer something different, and we do need good training for people so they've got worthwhile jobs. I mean, there's nothing's going to give you more pride than a good job where you really excel, rather than having to carry a knife around to prove who you are. So we do have to invest in our people. We have to invest in our young people, and that it won't be instantaneous. It doesn't happen tomorrow. But unless we do that, we will have a group of people, and we've already got 1 million young people in the country, not just in London, who are not either in full-time employment or education. Those are the people we really need to get around and offer them something alternative.
I guess then you and I have to strike the balance between reassuring people about the nature of our country as we experience it, but also being aware that for some parts of our community and our society, that is not how they experience things. Continued coverage of the events in Huntingdon today will follow during the second part of this programme, running up to 1 o'clock. But that full update will occur after the latest weather forecast, a short break, and then we'll be back.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, this is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Many of us will actually get a decent dose of sunshine over the course of today. We're actually in between weather systems at the moment. Got one waiting in the wings for next week and one that's just clearing off the far southeast of England. But in between that, many of us will get off with a reasonably dry day overall. However, the exception to that is the far northwest of Scotland, where we do have some quite frequent showers and areas of rain pushing through, some coastal gales for the Highlands over towards the Northern Isles later on as well. Some of those could turn thundery in the mixture as well. But apart from a few scattered showers just drifting into western coast elsewhere, there'll be a good amount of sunshine, but even in that sunshine it is going to still feel fairly cool, highs of only 12-13 degrees Celsius in the south and more around 10 to 11 degrees Celsius further north. The sunshine will increasingly disappear as well from the west as we head into the afternoon and evening period. The cloud is going to be building. Initially for Northern Ireland, Wales, down towards southwestern England, but it will spread in across all areas of the UK as we head into the overnight period. This coming with areas of rain, actually quite heavy and persistent over some hills, particularly across parts of northwestern England. But this is also filtering in some much milder air. So whilst it could be a little bit of a chilly evening, by dawn on Monday morning it is going to be seeing temperatures in double digits for the vast majority of us. So a very mild start to Monday, but also a very cloudy one and a very unsettled one, with areas of rain continuing to push through. Again, always the most persistent out towards the west. Generally, the further east that you are, you might see some sunshine just breaking through that cloud at times, generally holding on to some of the drier interludes as well. But it's going to be a very windy day and still very mild as well. Temperatures around 15 to 16 degrees Celsius, notably above where we should be for this time of year. And the unsettled but mild theme is looking to continue right throughout this week. Bye-bye.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. The programme inevitably taking a rather different shape from normal today, because to remind you of the breaking news, 2 British nationals have been arrested in connection with a mass stabbing on board a train that was travelling from Doncaster to London. British Transport Police has said that it is not treating the incident as a terrorist incident. The police confirmed that there is a 32-year-old male who's a black British national and a 35-year-old male who's a British national of Caribbean descent, currently in custody. Eyewitnesses reported scenes of panic, with one describing a man waving a large knife as passengers fled from the carriage where the incident was occurring. In a statement, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said that his thoughts are with those affected, and he praised the emergency services for their swift response. Meanwhile, His Majesty the King has also commented on the attack. He said, "My wife and I were truly appalled and shocked to hear of the dreadful knife attack that took place on board a train in Cambridgeshire last night. Our deepest sympathy and thoughts are with all those affected and their loved ones. We're particularly grateful to the emergency services for their response to this awful incident." Superintendent for the British Transport Police, John Lovelace, spoke at a press conference just before 11 o'clock.
It's a shocking incident, and first and foremost, my thoughts are with the family and friends of those who've been affected and those who are injured. At approximately 7:42 p.m. yesterday evening, there were calls to the police service in relation to multiple stabbings which took place on board a train service that departed Doncaster at 6:25 p.m. and was en route to London King's Cross Station. Officers immediately attended Huntington Station alongside paramedics, where armed police officers from Cambridgeshire Police boarded the train and arrested 2 people. Within 8 minutes of the 999 call being made, 2 men were brought into police custody, where they remain this morning. I can tell you that these are the first male, a 32-year-old male, a black British national, and a 35-year-old man, a British national of Caribbean descent. They were both arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. Both were born in the United Kingdom. As stated, they remain this morning in separate police stations for questioning. 10 people were taken to hospital by ambulance, and another person self-presented later that evening. While 9 were initially believed to have life-threatening injuries, following assessment and treatment, 4, thankful to say, have been discharged. However, 2 patients remain in a life-threatening condition. British Transport Police declared a major incident yesterday, and counter-terrorism policing were initially supporting our investigation. However, at this stage, there is nothing to suggest that this is a terrorist incident. This is a British Transport Police investigation, and we continue to work to establish at pace the full circumstances and the motivations that have led to this incident. At this early stage, it would not be appropriate to speculate on the cause of this incident. As you can see, the station this morning remains closed. However, we expect trains to be passing through the station this morning. passengers will see a high visibility presence of police officers at stations and on trains throughout today, up and down the transport network. Our officers are there to reassure the public and to address any concerns they may have. I'd like to thank the public personally for their patience and their cooperation. Yesterday evening, which has already greatly assisted our investigation through the help the public have tendered, as well as the multi-agency response partners from colleagues in other blue light services. I'd like to extend my thanks to our colleagues within Cambridgeshire Police, the East of England Ambulance Service, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service, and Counter-Terrorism Policing. And finally, I'd like to appeal for anyone that's watching who has information connected to yesterday's incident, however big or small you feel that may be, that has not yet spoken to police, to make contact. You can do so by texting the British Transport Police on 61016, that's 61016, quoting reference 663 of the 1st of November 2025.
Yes, that was John Lovelace from the British Transport Police. He was speaking rather more than an hour ago, just before 11 o'clock. And I drew two elements of reassurance from that. One, it was there was no reason to believe, he said, that it was a terror attack, from which I deduce that we've no reason to assume that there would be a repetition. You know, we're not to think that this is part of a rolling programme of terror attacks, so I think that is reassuring. And also the news that there are 2 patients rather than 9 who have life-threatening injuries. And of course, we very much hope that those 2 people will make a full and quick recovery. He also mentioned there that he expected trains to be passing through the station during the day. And I think I have seen in our previous reports from Jack Carson trains moving in the background. So the network has begun to move again. But Jack Carson, I think, has not moved from Huntingdon Station. He's our GB News national reporter. Any update for us, Jack?
Well, certainly this morning forensic investigations have continued here at the station. We've seen some black tarpaulin put over a part of the road in the closed-off site that the police have been working with, and a forensic investigator taking photos of what appears to be evidence on that black tarpaulin. The police essentially here this morning and into this afternoon now, gathering a picture of exactly what happened here, how it happened. Of course, on that train, we heard the witness statements about the horrific scenes, people trying to just get away from where those attacks were taking place, move through the train as fast as they could. A lot of their own personal possessions and belongings would have been left on that train, but a lot of them may well now also be of interest to the police as they begin their investigations. We saw sight of the really active police investigations here overnight, with officers down on the tracks using torches to look under the train as part of their investigations, very much leaving no stone unturned here to ensure, as I was saying, that they were able to build up this full picture exactly as what has happened. And you mentioned there we were waiting for this press conference this morning, waiting for an update, not only on, of course, as we got it in the end, the condition of those that had been taken to hospital last night, but also on the suspects. There'd been starting to appear this vacuum of information since the last statement, which was released just after midnight last night, but having it confirmed by the British Transport Police this morning that a 32-year-old male who's a black British national and a 35-year-old male who is said to be a British national of Caribbean descent are the 2 people that remain in police custody this morning, arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. Confirmation that they were both born in the UK. And as you were saying, Michael, really reassuring to hear that only 2 of the 9 remaining in hospital have a life-threatening condition. 4 being discharged. I think that is testament to the immediate response from the emergency services. Not only the police, who in that press conference confirmed that within 8 minutes of getting that 999 call at 7:42 p.m. last night, armed police had arrested the 2 suspects who remain in custody this morning. So not only that within 8 minutes they were here and making arrests, but also that the East of England Ambulance Service were able to get those people who had, as what has been described as life-threatening conditions, into hospital, starting to receive care, and that is the very reason why 4 of them have been able to be discharged this morning so soon after they were thought to be critically ill. Though the substantial, of course, of those substance of those injuries, of course, we do not know, but we also know that on the response of that 999 call, Operation Plato is brought into effect, and that is the procedure when there is classed as what's called a marauding terrorist attack, and that involves a no-notice attack with a high threat. But in that statement given this morning, reassuring to know that the police have no reason, they say, nothing to suggest that this is a terrorist incident. But of course, as we've seen this morning, the investigations here at Huntington Station continue.
Thank you very much, Jack Carson, speaking to us from Huntington Station, where that train is still parked. The investigation continues. Joining us now is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the programme.
Morning.
So the police said just before 11 o'clock that there was nothing to suggest that this was a terror incident. Would you like to run through the implications, the significance of that statement? Why is that so important to say?
Well, I think it is significant, Michael, yes, because we waited 15 hours for any kind of an update. And I think that had this been a very clear-cut episode of a marauding terrorist attack, then we would have got indications from all manner of sources, from the police, of course, but from the government, Home Secretary, the Prime Minister. We would have known about a Cobra meeting, for instance, being scheduled for this, which there isn't. So all of that kind of pointed to it not being potentially straightforward. And then when we heard from the superintendent in that news statement to camera, I think it became very clear that he's unequivocal that as far as he's concerned, the information they have just doesn't point to a terrorist attack. And what it seems to point to is not terrorism, which of course is of great concern to people right across the country, but issues around lawless Britain, which are also equally of great concern to people around the UK. I mean, one of the things I think that gave us an early indication, Michael, last night, that perhaps this wasn't as straightforward as just a marauding terrorist attack was when the officers attending, we got word that they had declared an Operation Plato to denote that this was a marauding terror attack, only to quickly rescind that again. And that sort of just sent some kind of alarm bells ringing, just to kind of step back a little bit and not be as equivocal in our coverage that that's what we were seeing here. And now with everything that officer is saying, it absolutely points to some kind of criminal act on the train. Now, was it a fight that got out of control? Was it some other kind of violence or fallout between groups? You just never know. But what I can tell you is that crime on the rail network is very significant. 80,000 criminal incidents on the rail network last year alone. Over the past decade, those offences in particular of violent crime and sexual offences have soared by 55% to an all-time high. So there are real concerns about the rail network because it is vulnerable. You have only a certain number of British Transport Police officers who the majority of, for understandable reasons, are in the big, busy metropolitan areas. But actually, the train doesn't just pass through the busy metropolitan areas, it's travelling through countryside. And it's travelling in areas where often police are not on board, and all you have are perhaps a station staff member or two, and that is it. So people are very vulnerable to incidents of criminality on trains, which, as I've just said, Michael, are very common, sadly.
Mark, that's very interesting, because I was drawing personally some reassurance from the police's statement that there was nothing to suggest it was a terror incident. In other words, there was no reason why we would suspect that there was a kind of rolling programme of attacks. There's no reason why we should expect this to happen today or tomorrow again. But what you're saying is that although this is an absolutely extraordinary example of violence on a train, examples of crime on a train abound.
Sadly, that is true. And for understandable reasons, of course, the focus of the public is on terrorism. It's the ultimate in terms of these random attacks in which people can get caught up in. And we know from a terrorist point of view, in the way in which the terror threat has evolved over the decades, it's all about causing the maximum number of casualties. So it's absolutely horrifying for people to contemplate ever being caught up in that. But, you know, criminality, as you said there, on the likes of the rail network is very significant. Now, British Transport Police will say they've been making inroads and some key issues like robberies, violent robberies on trains. It was about 1,200 incidents last year, but that was down 20%. But I'm not sure how reassured people are by that. I think there are many people watching and listening to this broadcast today will have had experiences on the rail network where they feel quite vulnerable. And part of the reason for this, Michael, is the way in which drugs are transported on the rail network from one centre of population to another. It's called county lines. You get big drug dealing operations in a big city that then uses the rail networks. The dealers go on these trains and they head out to all types of locations, smaller towns, sometimes villages, away into the hinterland. And these are often violent drug dealers on a train. Many of them carry knives because they know that they often will come up against another violent drug dealer, and all of the potential for that descending into kind of violent confrontations is there. So yeah, it's a concern, and the only possible solution to this, or at least mitigation, it's not a solution, is to put more police officers on trains. You know, we don't do that at the moment, but is there a sort of maybe an argument for doing that, a bit like the Americans do with air marshals on aircraft?
Mark White, an interesting thought indeed. Thank you very much indeed. My panel is very patiently still here, former Labour Chair Baroness Hayter and Policy Fellow at Onward, Andrew Barclay. Diane Hayter, you were saying earlier that the approach of the government should be to reassure people, to use statistics, you know, that this happens very, very rarely, that we should all feel safe on trains. Heavens, Mark White's report there on the amount of crime on trains painted a very different picture. I must say I'm quite a big user of trains myself, and I have not been afflicted by this, affected by that. But that painted a horrifying picture, which I must say I was not really aware of.
Nor I, and I've never, you know, I haven't read about it in the papers or anywhere else, which is unusual, because normally that is the sort of thing, you know, in the annual statistics or whatever that comes out. So it's interesting if the Transport Police know about this and are not telling us. Now, I don't know, you know, how big that is, but there is an interesting thing if people know this is happening and are not warning passengers. I hope that isn't the case, because certainly...
Well, those figures were obviously public.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Mark White couldn't have quoted.
Couldn't have done it. Then, you know, then we need to be warned when we get on trains. You know, watch your baggage. You know, don't leave it. And maybe we all do that to some extent of watching where we are. I mean, I think that the other issue about all crime that you touched on earlier is how much we depend on the public for intelligence. And therefore, again, if you see something on a train that doesn't look right, you know, they ask us to report it. Do we all do that? And I do think that's important, because that can lead into the sort of the intelligence then taking it up and looking at whether it's social media or whatever about what might be happening. And that's what I guess they're doing with these two people in custody at the moment, is looking at all their social media. And that is a big issue, of course, for the government. How much should our security services be able to look at our web activity? But if we want to keep safe, that's probably what we have to do. That's the price we pay.
Andrew, we were talking earlier about whether today will mark significant changes in policy, whether, you know, things will have to be different in the future. Just hearing those statistics that were being quoted by Mark White, I mean, I can well imagine that there will be a new focus on how safe our trains are. All right, we've no reason to believe that this incident would be repeated if it's not a terrorist incident, but I had not realised how many crimes there were on trains. By the way, there are likely to be more crimes than there are crimes reported. That's the normal state of affairs. So do you think there'll be more of a focus on what goes on trains?
Well, first of all, that's news to me as well. I wasn't aware of those train statistics. They're pretty, I think he said 50% in the last few years, which is a crazy amount. I think the reality of crime is that it's not just train crime that's rising. It's all sorts of other crime, including shoplifting. There's now a sense of lawlessness that has emboldened all sorts of criminals. And so whilst they might take action to deal with train crime and put policemen on carriages, I think there's a much broader issue here that needs to be dealt with, which is...
And you're asserting that. I mean, you think that is absolutely the case. You don't think it's just a perception that there's been an increase in lawlessness. You think there really has been an increase in lawlessness.
I think there has been. And on top of that, I think what's really important is the perception and the sense, because that's our lived experience as citizens and taxpayers. That matters a lot. It's not just the statistics, which clearly paint, which clearly reinforce what I'm saying, that there is a rise in crime, and certain crimes more so than others, like knife crime or shoplifting or phone crime. But it all contributes to this decline of trust and this sense of anxiety and panic and unsafety that we are experiencing.
Dan, can I switch away from today's news just for 5 minutes? We'll go back to that story in due course. But I'd originally asked you on to speak in this second part of the programme about whether you thought that natural justice had been done to Andrew, the person formerly known as Prince Andrew. I mean, here is a case of a man who's gone through the most extraordinary public humiliation, but someone who's never been found guilty of any sort of crime. Does that represent natural justice, in your view?
I think it does, because I think that he's been shielded, to be honest, from what one would normally expect, because he hasn't offered to go to America, he hasn't offered to meet with the victims and help them with evidence. Now, whether or not he himself did anything, he was clearly close friends with someone that was a sex offender. It's unlikely that he never saw any of these young girls around, and he could have been a witness.
I think you're going a bit far there. I mean, Andrew denies everything, of course.
I know he denies everything. He doesn't deny being on aeroplanes and travelling and visiting Epstein. That bit he absolutely acknowledges, and we now know, how much that was going on. So that's there. That's not denied. He's denying he himself was involved. But it's unusual for him not to have offered to be a witness, just to how many young girls would have been on the planes that were flying in and out and stuff like that. So I think that he has been shielded, and he was, very close friends with a sex offender. And I think he...
Have you ever had an inappropriate friend? I mean, possibly one you didn't even know about. But I mean, I've had friends who've gone to prison, and I've sometimes remained friends with them. I've got friends,
yes, and I hope that he has been good in the past to his friends, and that his friends rally round now. That would be a test, that they should be there now. But that doesn't mean that he is immune to losing all the rights and privilege. I'm afraid I think there are a number of very entitled men. They think that because of their position or their wealth, they're able to get away with anything. And I'm afraid there's a bit of that here.
So you're not bothered about an abuse of natural justice. Andrew, what's your reaction?
I think, like you said, he hasn't been found guilty of anything. So I think that actually the King has dealt with this very well. Justice has been served. He's been cancelled, stripped of all purpose in life, basically, and he's going to live the rest of his life effectively in exile. And
why is that justified? Why is that natural justice?
Because the King, someone in the role of in the role of the public eye has got to be held to much higher standards than the rest of us. And the King has to not only deal with this as a personal matter, but also a professional matter and protect the monarchy. I think he's brought the monarchy into disrepute, and he has damaged not only the monarchy, but our country. So it's absolutely right what's happened so far. I think beyond that, I think it is important. He hasn't been found guilty of anything, and I think it's time for a bit of humanity toward him. Justice has been dealt with. I think we could probably move on from here.
Yes, of course, some people would dispute that. They think that the justice system should take the matter further. I thought about this myself, and I wondered whether the proper expression was moral justice has been done, in as much as I mean, here's someone who benefited from many privileges in life, and that wasn't just in a way, because you weren't born in that way and I wasn't and you weren't. And therefore, maybe there is a moral justice that someone who is in such a privileged position, who should have behaved in a certain way, did not behave in that certain way, and has had their comeuppance. Maybe one can explain it in those terms. But anyway, I'm most grateful to you, panel. Thank you so much for your patience today, Diane Hayter and Andrew Barclay. Well, now we're joined by Professor of Criminology at Staffordshire University, James Treadwell. James, thank you very much for joining us, I assume at short notice, on GB News. We were hearing a lot about the amount of crime that occurs on trains. We've been told by the police that there's nothing to suggest that this was a terror incident. It wouldn't be helpful to ask you to speculate on what's happened, because we simply don't know. But I just wonder whether, as a criminologist, any reflections occur to you at this moment.
Yeah, I think, Michael, there are some interesting things coming out. We have to remember that although something isn't necessarily declared a terror incident, it doesn't mean that at some later stage it won't be. There's a lot of investigation that has to go on, and there will be a lot of unknowns at the moment, and investigation does take time. Now, there are certain interesting facts. There are interesting facts about where the offenders boarded. There's clearly nothing at the moment to suggest that it's terrorism. The normal sort of shouts, the normal things that we would see at a terrorist incident. But then we ought to remember that, the kind of contours are in some ways being blurred a little bit. If we look at Southport and Axel Ritter Cabana, not a terrorist incident, but here's a young man very radicalised into a violent ideology, has had contact with Prevent and the government anti-radicalisation schemes, has been involved in accessing violent material that includes terrorist violent material, but isn't necessarily ultimately then convicted of an incident that is motivated by an Islamist cause. So, we'll get a better impression in time as to what the motivations are. But it is too early to speculate in some ways. But at the same time, while the police are saying not at the moment, it doesn't mean that at some subsequent point there won't be more that comes to light.
I take that point. What the police said was nothing to suggest. I found that word nothing pretty interesting. I didn't think they'd commit themselves to a word nothing to suggest if they could foresee they might have to retract that in a few days' time. Did the word nothing not mean quite a lot to you?
It does, but at the same time as that, I think we need to be careful here as well, because let's be honest about it. I heard Mark White previously talking about the kind of motivations as well. Now, those motivations, yes, there's a lot of crime on the railways, but the last thing that people who are involved, for example, in county lines drug dealing are going to immediately do is to attack a number of members of the public. They don't want to draw attention to themselves or their criminal activities. There isn't anything to suggest that this is a violent confrontation between groups. This is what's been suggested is members of the public are sort of fleeing from it. So we don't know. It could be those things. It could be a lot of things, but nothing to suggest is very much nothing to suggest at the moment. And there will be a lot of investigatory work that has to go on. Even getting access to the digital devices, because of the time that this has happened at, it's going to take the police quite a long time to begin to really be able to build up a picture. Now, we do know from terrorist attacks, one of the things with out and out overt terrorist attacks is that there will be claims made quickly. There'll also likely be shouts, that are associated with Islamist attackers and so on. And there's clearly nothing to suggest that that's happened. But then the reasons for it, do seem to be slightly obscure at the moment. And to have kind of mass casualties in this sort of way, it suggests that there's something, there is something fairly significant about it, although it might not necessarily be terror. Is it about mental health, for example? Is it some other sort of cause that's driving. We don't know, but in time, I'm sure we will get the full picture.
You referred to Stockport, which I think you said was deemed. You referred to Southport, which I think you said was deemed not to be a terror incident. Some people might think this is a semantic debate. Why does it matter so much to know whether it was a terror attack or not?
Yeah, and I certainly take why people think it's a semantic debate in some ways, but because ultimately, when we look at it, the victims, whether it's deemed terrorism or not, the victims are victims. It's horrendous and horrific. The impact, I suspect, on the public is very, very similar. To raise that feeling of lack of safety and security. It does, to some extent, impact on the process. It also impacts on every aspect of the criminal justice process, from the sentencing to where individuals will be held, to the resources that are available for investigation. So there are a whole array of different factors at play as to whether it is terrorism or not. But ultimately, either way, we have a horrendous crime that is going to dent public confidence in safety and security in the United Kingdom.
Yes, I very much fear that is the case. Thank you very much indeed, James Treadwell. Good afternoon to any of you who have just joined us, either in vision or on sound. Let's remind you of the breaking news. 2 British nationals have been arrested in connection with a mass stabbing on board a train that was travelling between Doncaster and London. The British Transport Police say that they are not treating it as a terrorist incident. In a statement, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said that his thoughts are with all those affected. Meanwhile, His Majesty the King also commented on the attack. He said, "My wife and I were truly appalled and shocked to hear of the dreadful knife attack." Now, let's bring you the latest statement from the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander. She says, "My thoughts are with those who have been impacted by the shocking incident in Huntingdon last night, especially those still in the hospital today. I'd like to pay enormous tribute to the staff and officers who responded and to the public for their patience and cooperation. I'm receiving regular updates from the British Transport Police, who are leading the response to this awful incident, as well as LNER and other organisations involved. Trains are now running in the area. However, Huntingdon Station remains closed, with no passenger trains passing through. Passengers will see a high visibility presence of officers at stations and on trains throughout today who are there to reassure the public." That's the end of that statement. Joining us now is the former Deputy Chief Constable of the British Transport Police, Andy Trotter. Andy, I was saying to one of your former colleagues earlier that the response appears to have been exemplary, and the emergency services will be drawing some satisfaction from that, despite obviously being very alarmed and very concerned about those who were badly injured.
Yes, absolutely. I think the response from the emergency services was very good. It was a horrific, awful, and terrifying incident for the poor people involved in it. But I think the one thing that's come from this is that the work between the passengers, the driver, Network Rail, and the British Transport Police and Cambridgeshire Police, and of course the East of England Ambulance Service, work very well. They do rehearse these things. They work together quite a lot on exercises, and they learn from previous events. And this seems to have gone as well as cruise.
Yes, it happened that the armed response units were in a police headquarters, which is very close to Huntingdon Station. So it was obviously an extremely good place to stop the train. One is absolutely astonished by the statistic that within 8 minutes of the emergency call, the suspects had been arrested. I mean, that must be a sort of record-breaking number, I would have thought.
Yes, I think it was the extraordinary good planning for that evening and the way that the organisations worked together. But whilst this one went very, very well, I often reflect about had that been in a much more rural location, the attendance times would, of course, been very different. But this worked well. The fact that BTP works so closely with Network Rail, so closely with their colleague forces, has paid off in the circumstance. And I think when one reflects on this and when they do the debriefs, they will be looking at other locations, and a greater challenge perhaps would be in those much more rural places where responses will be much longer. But Lisa, let's look at this and say, well done to the emergency services for the response, and as you say, record.
Lots of people in response to this sort of incident say, the answer to all this would be policemen on trains, in this case trains. But, I mean, that does not seem to me a realistic answer at all because of the number of trains and the length of trains. And anyway, would a police officer be able to make an effective response? If the answer isn't to put policemen on every train, police officers on every train, what can be done to make trains safer, or anyway, to reassure the public?
I think this will raise a number of questions because we're all sitting at home thinking about this today, thinking about what it's like sometimes to be in a particularly late night train when it might be disorder through drink, drugs or crime or whatever. And whilst this particular type of event is thankfully very rare, disorder on trains isn't that rare. And I think one of the things people will be thinking about is how vulnerable you are when you're stuck in a train. And I think the absence sometimes of rail staff, of security staff, is a real problem. And I think everyone needs to, within the transport industry and within government, needs to think about this. I think we've gone too far in the reduction of visible staffing on railway stations, on trains, on the underground, and in public spaces in general. You're quite right that you think there's 5 million rail journeys a year, you think how rammed trains are, how frequent trains are, it just isn't feasible there'll be a police officer on the train. And on a packed tube carriage or tube train, you wouldn't even be aware they were there anyway, because you wouldn't even see them. But I think new technology, I think we need to think of much more ways of how we can keep it safe. And I think this ought to kick off a greater debate around the fact that I think the reductions in visible security have gone too far. And I think they need to be addressed.
When I get on a London bus, I'm aware of screens around the bus that show that every corner, every nook and cranny of the bus is being covered by CCTV. So I can see my own face, and then I can see all the other places on the bus have been covered and therefore recorded. Now, presumably, if they do that on buses, it must be because they think it has some deterrent effect. But on a train, the position is not the same. I'm not quite sure whether there is CCTV everywhere, but it's certainly not, as it were, shown to us that we're being recorded all the time. Do you think there's anything to be thought about there?
I think so. I mean, most train carriages will have CCTV. Most train stations will have it. There's an enormous amount of CCTV, be it on the transport system or on the roads or in many other places. Those are not being looked at live. They're very good for post-event investigation. They're not being monitored most of the time in real time. So I think whilst they are some degree of reassurance, we still see people carry out attacks, carry out disorder, even though they know they're on camera. I think the real issue then is there a good investigation afterwards from these sometimes minor events, but the sort of minor events that really disturb people. I think people are talking more and more about misbehaviour it does disturb. It is frightening. And you do worry about your loved ones going on.
Andy Trotter, thank you very much. Former Deputy Chief Constable at British Transport Police, thank you very much for your insight. Joining me once again now is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome back to the programme. A few minutes since you were last on, have you had any new reflections as time has gone by on what we've witnessed and what we should learn and what we should think?
Well, I was interested to hear your guest, one before Andy Trotter, there, who it seems to me he hasn't completely discounted some kind of a marauding attack. I'm not sure I share his analysis, though, of what has gone on. I'm more inclined with you to put a lot behind what the superintendent said, being very unequivocal and saying there is no evidence of there having been a terrorist attack. And I, sat through all of the coverage of Axel Rudicabana and Southport. That was a very different situation investigation because they just weren't quite sure, because they thought there might be a chance. They delayed and delayed being able to be as equivocal about what the potential cause was. And of course, further down the road, we knew that that's because there were some aspects of that case where he was manufacturing the deadly toxin ricin at home. He had the Al-Qaeda manual. He had a fascination with the Taliban. There were some indicators there. It's clear they've not just not found the indicators, but I think they have, from the suspects that they have in custody and from the eyewitness reports that they've managed to piece together, they are pointing, I think, towards criminality here. Because if you look at the other potential options, Michael, think about what often comes up in these kind of mass casualty attacks. If it's not terrorism, could be mental health issues. Well, the odds of two people suffering mental health issues at the same time and deciding to carry out an attack, I would say, are, you know, just non-existent in that sense. And also eyewitness reports, of course, they were running down the train to get away from what was unfolding in that carriage. But was it really individuals who were chasing down passengers and trying to stab them, or were they caught up in what was a very violent fracas that was going on within that carriage in the first place? Maybe some people trying to intervene to stop the fight that was breaking out and getting stabbed for their troubles. We don't really know. All I will say with eyewitness reports, these are traumatic and fast-moving events. I was saying on breakfast this morning, I'm reminded of covering the bombings in London in 2005, and you remember the dreadful mistaken shooting of Jean-Charles de Menezes, the innocent Brazilian who they believed might be one of the terrorists on the run. And the eyewitness reports that came in there, Michael, spoke of this young man vaulting the barriers, the ticket barriers at Stockwell tube station and running down into the tube. That's not what happened. What they were seeing was the armed police that were trying to catch up with them, vaulting those ticket barriers. But that was, the kind of confusion that happens in fast-moving and traumatic events where people don't necessarily get a complete handle on what was happening there. So all I would say with regard to me anyway, it doesn't feel like it was a marauding attack, whether it was motivated by terrorism or some kind of other issue. To me, it does smack of criminality that's got way, way out of control in terms of the disturbance, the violence that's broken out in that carriage.
Thank you very much. Those are very interesting reflections. That's our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. So we had an update from the police. It came just before 11 o'clock. Let us remind ourselves of exactly what the police said, because we're relying very heavily on that statement. It was the Superintendent for the British Transport Police, John Lovelace, who spoke at the press conference outside Huntingdon Station.
It's a shocking incident, and first and foremost, my thoughts are with the family and friends of those who've been affected and those who are injured. At approximately 7:42 p.m. yesterday evening, there were calls to the police service in relation to multiple stabbings which took place on board a train service that departed Doncaster at 6:25 p.m. and was en route to London King's Cross Station. Officers immediately attended Huntingdon Station alongside paramedics, where armed police officers from Cambridgeshire Police boarded the train and arrested 2 people. Within 8 minutes of the 999 call being made, 2 men were brought into police custody, where they remain this morning. I can tell you that these are the first male, a 32-year-old male, a black British national, and a 35-year-old man, a British national of Caribbean descent. They were both arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. Both were born in the United Kingdom. As stated, they remain this morning in separate police stations for questioning. 10 people were taken to hospital by ambulance, and another person self-presented later that evening. While 9 were initially believed to have life-threatening injuries, following assessment and treatment, 4, thankful to say, have been discharged. However, 2 patients remain in a life-threatening condition. British Transport Police declared a major incident yesterday, and counter-terrorism policing were initially supporting our investigation. However, at this stage, there is nothing to suggest that this is a terrorist incident. This is a British Transport Police investigation, and we continue to work to establish at pace the full circumstances and the motivations that have led to this incident. At this early stage, it would not be appropriate to speculate on the cause of this incident. As you can see, the station this morning remains closed. However, we expect trains to be passing through the station this morning. Passengers will see a high visibility presence of police officers at stations and on trains throughout today, up and down the transport network. Our officers are there to reassure the public and to address any concerns they may have. I'd like to thank the public personally for their patience and their cooperation. Yesterday evening, which has already greatly assisted our investigation through the help the public have tendered, as well as the multi-agency response partners from colleagues in other blue light services. I'd like to extend my thanks to our colleagues within Cambridgeshire Police, the East of England Ambulance Service, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service, and counter-terrorism policing. And finally, I'd like to appeal for anyone that's watching who has information connected to yesterday's incident, however big or small you feel that may be, that has not yet spoken to police, to make contact. You can do so by texting the British Transport Police on 61016, that's 61016, quoting reference 663 of the 1st of November 2025.
That was Superintendent John Lovelace from the British Transport Police, who was speaking approximately 2 hours ago. Joining me now is the journalist Sue Reid. Sue, welcome to GB News. What are your reflections on how safe we are on our railways and whether we could be safer on our railways?
I don't think we're safe anywhere anymore, and that's the terrible thing. Ricky Gervais, who has to be the most, one of the best celebrity comedians that we have, has just put out on X today a meme or a sort of joke, not really a joke, but it's saying, going to London, don't forget your stab vest. Well, he said that just before this alarming event happened. And I think he is right. I really do. We cannot pop out to the shops. We can't walk the dog. We can't get on a train. We can't get on the tube. We can't walk down London's main streets. And certainly not in central London, without feeling under threat. And that's not because we're imagining it or the British public are imagining it. It's because there's evidence, it's happened.
Well, I mean, all these things are subjective, aren't they, Sue? I mean, I do all of those things in London. I live in central London without feeling that I'm under threat. I've been so fortunate I haven't experienced crime that's affected me for some decades. But I suppose I'm not unique in that respect. I mean, we read of crime, we hear of crime. Clearly there is crime. But then I think we also have to ask ourselves, well, how often has it touched us? And we should ask that question not selfishly, but in order to get some kind of statistical idea of how common these things are and under how much of a threat we are. Our country will be paralysed if people are in fear and trembling when actually, statistically, they need not be.
Well, I really don't think that statistics, well, I mean, anyway, the statistics, as we know in this country now, are completely up the creek. I know that women in particular, and girls in particular, and many young men, boys, are very worried about walking down their streets. And I honestly do think it is a fear now. And that's not because they're imagining it, it's because of events that happened. You know, I know this is not terror, but it's certainly about terrifying, isn't it? I mean, it isn't actually normal behaviour, is it? As we see on social media all the time, for people to walking around with knives and machetes. I mean, we're normalising it to say, well, it hasn't happened to me, so it can't have happened to anyone.
No, I certainly wasn't saying it hadn't happened to anyone. Of course, it's happened to these people last night, and it will have, you know, life-changing effects for people who are injured and for their families and so on. So I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm just saying that, you know, 1.5 billion rail journeys are made every year. Yes. And we haven't had an incident like this on a train in my memory. We had the terrorist incidents back in 2005. We had the Parsons Green attack after that on the London Underground. So I'm just asking for, you know, a little statistical balance, that out of many billions of journeys that have been made, this is something which happens very, very rarely.
Well, I would say that it shouldn't happen at all, to be honest. And if you want a frank assessment, I don't think it would have happened 30 years ago. I think if it had happened 30 years ago, this story today, I'm putting a journalist hat on, would of course be getting attention, but it would get attention for weeks and months going forward.
Sue, 30 years ago, people were being blown up in pubs and on buses by the IRA.
Yeah. Oh, of course. We were, yes, we were, indeed.
So, I mean, there wasn't a golden age of non-violence 30 years ago.
No, there wasn't, but it's, I feel that it's closer to home, to be honest. With the IRA, we understood what they were getting at, you know, what their motive was, and we were able to tackle it. This is much more random, isn't it? You know, it may take ages for the police to unravel what was in the minds of these 30-year-olds. And the problem is that it's not one element that you say, okay, that's the problem, well, let's try to solve that problem. This is sporadic. It's coming from, really, I think, from a society where, of course, these guys are in their 30s, and they've been educated in the British schooling system, about which I'm passionate. But I bet you, without, you know, having anything, saying anything untoward and jeopardising any court case, that they...
No, please don't do that.
No,
please don't do
that. I don't worry. But we are dealing with many, many young people who have never heard the word no. And I know that sounds old-fashioned, but it's true. At home, it's chaos. At school, it's chaos. And that is part of the problem.
Thank you, Sue Reid. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And now, just before we go, let me remind you of the latest statement from the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. She said, after last night's horrific attack, my thoughts today are with the victims, their friends and family. My deepest thanks go to the British Transport Police, Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service and the East of England Ambulance Service. They responded rapidly with the utmost professionalism and they saved lives. I would also like to pay tribute to the exceptional bravery of staff and passengers on the train. We now know this attack is not being treated as terrorism and that 2 British-born British nationals have been arrested. The investigation is ongoing. I am receiving regular updates from the police. And the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, made a statement. She said, my thoughts are with those who have been impacted by the shocking incident in Huntingdon last night, especially those still in hospital today. I'd like to pay enormous tribute to the staff and officers who responded and the public for their patience and cooperation. I'm receiving regular updates from the British Transport Police, who are leading the response to this awful incident, as well as LNER, the train company, and other organisations involved. Trains are now running in the area, however, Huntingdon Station remains closed, with trains passing through. Passengers will see a high visibility presence of officers at stations and on trains throughout today, and they are there to reassure the public. And His Majesty the King said, "My wife and I are truly appalled and shocked to hear the dreadful knife attack that took place on board a train in Cambridgeshire last night. Our deepest sympathy and thoughts are with those affected and their loved ones. We're particularly grateful to the emergency services." Well, I'd like to thank everyone who's participated in this programme, which has been fast-moving as we covered the events in Huntingdon over the weekend. There will be continuing coverage on GB News throughout the day, starting with Dawn Neeson's programme, which will be next. I'll be back next week with Camilla Tominey for a special programme for Remembrance Sunday, beginning at 9:30 and lasting till 1. Until then, bye-bye.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, a very good afternoon to you. This is your latest GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. Do make the most of any sunshine you do have around today, because there is signs of a change over the next few days. Low pressure is going to be arriving from the Atlantic, spilling in more unsettled conditions, and even this afternoon we're going to see the cloud building across Northern Ireland, skies turning greyer as rain arrives later on into the evening. And that will continue to spread eastwards across all other areas of the UK overnight. So that rain turning quite heavy and persistent in places, particularly around the hills of northwestern England, and it will turn increasingly windy as well. But all this cloud is filtering in some much milder conditions as well. So by dawn tomorrow morning, many of us will be in double-digit figures to kick off the day. And those values of 11 to 13 degrees Celsius are more akin to what we'd normally expect by day at this time of the year. Despite the mild start to Monday, though, it is going to be a very unsettled one, so do be prepared for outbreaks of rain as you're heading to work first thing in the day. Again, they could be heavy at times, particularly out towards the west. Gales around exposed areas of coastal regions, even over some of the hills as well, so a very blustery, windy day to come as well. If you are a little bit further towards the east, you might see the cloud breaking up a touch more, some sunshine emerging at times, and generally in the east as well, you're likely to stay that little bit drier. But with those southwesterly winds, it is still going to be mild right across the board. Temperatures by the afternoon peaking at around 15 to 16 degrees Celsius in many locations, well above where we should be for this time of year. As we head into the evening, it's a continuing picture. Again, further areas of rain beginning to sweep in for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, and eventually into other western areas of Wales and England as well. It's a theme we're going to have to get used to, because that mild, unsettled conditions are likely to continue throughout next week as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
We're giving you the chance to win your entire Christmas this year paid for by us. First, we'll give you an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. Then we'll give you a further £10,000 cash to spend on all your Christmas presents, even a tree. Christmas lunch, that's on us too, with £1,000 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. Finally, a GB News Christmas goodie bag. For a chance to win, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message.